Fritz lay sleeping. Oh, yeah. Squatch-D TV, they're on the case. Steve and Chris, no mystery they can't face. Busting hoaxes, exposing lies. They're the champs of the Bigfoot mystery. Mystery. Bringing truth, science, and clarity. Squatch-D TV, they're the real deal. Uncovering the truth, it's time to reveal. Squatch-D TV, take us on your quest. Find the legend, put the rumors to rest. Late at night, shadows creeping. Deep in the woods, secrets lay sleeping. Ooh, yeah. Squatch-D TV, they're on the case. Steve and Chris, no mystery they can't face. Busting hoaxes, exposing lies. They're the champs of the Bigfoot mystery. Bringing truth, science, and clarity. Squatch-D TV, they're the real deal. Uncovering the truth, it's time to reveal.
Welcome to Squatch-D TV, where the truth is first before all else. Join your hosts, veteran investigator, TV personality, and author Steve Kulls, and from the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Project and the Kentucky Fried Fixes channel, Chris Bennett. Sit back and prepare to take yourself on a journey with the longest-running Bigfoot podcast, Squatch-D TV. Here are your hosts, Steve and Chris.
Well, if I haven't committed Harry Gary tonight, I'm doing okay. Yeah. So the gods above are working against me today. I have no idea why.
Before we get started, let me tell you, it is StreamYard. Okay, the sound that come off the show when you just started it from here, it sounds weak. But when I went over to the YouTube channel and listened to the intro there, fine, perfect. Got the bass, got the mids, everything.
So my mic is working fine now.
Something's going on with StreamYard, but
okay.
That's what it is. The problem is identified. I don't know if it's solved, but it's identified.
Yeah, I don't understand why. It must be in their processing when they upload the stream. It goes through their filters.
I don't know, but it's completely different here than it is on the live on the YouTube. Yeah, completely different. But it's okay.
And Alex, I see Tate's in there trying to stir the pot with you already tonight.
We'll let this guy in the chat.
Oh no.
Hey, and that's good to hear.
So anyway, let's get back to the intro. Okay.
Yep. But good Lord. Yeah, I had microphone issues, webcam issues. My Stream Deck was acting up, rebooted, and then the computer locked up on reboot for some strange reason. It was like everything was going on too much. And in the process, StreamYard's arguing with me that my PowerPoint was too big of a file to upload to the system to use it through StreamYard. So now we've had to do the end around that. So it's like juggling a bunch of things, but thanks for hanging in there, folks. Yeah, and let's do tonight's roll call. All right, here we go. I'm still.
Wow. That is hopping. Yes, there is a lot of people
in the house tonight. Red Creek Research. Hello, Mike. How you doing, brother? What? And of course, Mick is in the house. Hartgrove Mitchum. Good to see you, brother. And Alex, there's Alex, joined as a new member. Why, thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I think mine expired for some reason. I was like, okay, I should rejoin.
And we got Daniel Weeks. Hello, Daniel. Walter Kroll, Just Steve, John, Sasquatch Wizard, Adirondacks, Don Come Out Jr. Hello, Don. Just Steve. Hello, Just Steve. Kevin Harder, Professor. How are you, sir? Jen, good to see you in there. She's the bouncer for the night,
Hey,
along
Jen.
with Light. Walter Kroll, good to see you. Scrolling.
I'm lost.
Scrolling. Gary Johnson Sr. Hello, Gary. Good to see you.
Gary?
There's Chris there, Kentucky Fried Fixes.
Yeah, I'm there.
Ristel, good to see you, Ristel.
Like I'm here now. I think I closed it.
Finding the Trackway also in. The Bat Mom. Hello, Bat Mom. Good to see you.
Mom, Bristol.
David Parker. Hello, David.
David.
Don Fuller. There he is. Traveling with Jim, my good buddy Jim. Hey, how are you doing, Jim? Jay Fritz. There he is.
Hey,
Jay. Jay's got a seat in the front row. He says, Sandwich Savant. Who said Alex is on tonight? Excellent. Who else? Matt, Central Florida Bigfoot.
Matt.
Yeah, I'm scrolling a little bit
I
more.
got lost a long time ago.
Sharon from Belgium is in the house. Hello,
Sharon.
Sharon. Robert Den Duven. There you are, brother. Good to see you.
Robert, welcome.
Arthur Watt. How are you, Arthur? Good to see you.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. Of course, we got a little bit late start, but there's a lot of people. The chat is really hopping. And I had thought.
There he is, Mike, Technical Bigfoot Research.
Mike.
Hello.
Hello, Tech.
Still not finding monkeys, he said. Mrs. Trackway. Hello, Mrs. Trackway.
Wait.
DM Zabo. Hello, DM Zabo. Good to see you.
Like that Ace Frehley thing you got going on there.
Boris Khan. Boris. Hello, Boris. Good to
Boris.
see you. And the Beatron. Welcome, the Beatron. Good to see you. Trouble's in the house with Tate Hieronymus. There he is.
Tate.
Sorry, Alex. As long as he's got the paid ticket, he gets in the door. So shows his ID to the bouncer, and in he goes.
Yeah.
Martin McTighe, good to see you, Martin. Amy Wu is in the house. Amy, good to see you.
Hey, Amy, welcome.
Buttworm. There's Buttworm and
Buttworm.
Grasshopper.
Yeah, normally I don't get lost to about halfway down, but it was about 1/4 of the way down tonight.
My good buddy David Gray in the house. Yep, David. We may have a little mission to go on this weekend. I'll let you know. Who else? We got Patrick Collins. Pat Collins is in the house.
See, Pat.
Always there for a good laugh. And then it's trying to keep in there. Up there's Norma, girly Bigfooter. Good to see you, Norma.
Girly Bigfooter.
All right, I think we are at where we need to be.
Oh, thank goodness.
So I think we'll forego our usual banter, Chris, and we'll get right into the subject.
That sounds good. We're running a little bit behind tonight anyway.
But well, good to see you, Alex. And of course, you know, you've had some great adventures over the last few years. One of them that stands out to me, though, is the Alaska missions. And if you want to kind of set that up a little bit, that would be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys for having me on again. Always a pleasure to come on. I'm just getting over a little bit of a head cold, so if I accidentally have to turn the camera off and blow my nose, just giving you fair warning. Hopefully I don't sound too nasally or anything.
No, you sound great.
Got hit out of nowhere a few days ago. I'm blaming Chick-fil-A. It happened after I ate Chick-fil-A, but who knows what happened. So anyway, but yeah, like you said.
Hold on. Did you say Chick-fil-A? Sorry, I have to do that.
Two for good measure, right? That's great.
All right, back to the
We do have a mean chicken sandwich, I gotta say.
Oh yeah, I do gotta say Popeyes is better. Sorry, Chick-fil-A fans,
Yeah.
but
Agreed.
Yeah.
I agree.
But anyway, yeah. So yeah, like you said, I've had a chance to do a lot of cool stuff, and also to me, my Alaska adventures really stand out. I've gone up there twice now. In 2022, we went up for about 3 weeks, I think it was, around there. And then last year, in 2023, actually this time exactly last year, I would have been up in either driving up or in Alaska already. I actually drove up last year, and I spent a month in Alaska, half of which was spent at Area A, which is the place that's kind of been called that way on the Kenai Peninsula, and the rest was in other parts of Alaska. And yeah, so it's just been, obviously the adventure of a lifetime. Who doesn't want to go to Alaska? It's a special, special place, and there's a lot of really interesting Bigfoot stories up there, and some of the most interesting stuff I've ever really come across and just had the chance to kind of go investigate. So for sure, Alaska stands out to me as like the pinnacle. Kind of, it's not that everything else it kind of fades beside it, but definitely it is one of those places that really kind of ingrains into you, and it's really hard to forget going to a place like that.
Yeah, it's raw wilderness there, and
camp out and pan for gold.
yeah. I mean, it's like that. It's the end of the road kind of feeling, right? It's a place that a lot of people go to escape the rest of the world. Alaska. I mean, I literally drove to near where actually Larry Beans Baxter lives, who good friend of mine, and I'm sure you guys have had him on the program before. He's an awesome, former law enforcement, retired. He actually lives in Homer, Alaska, which is not that far from the westernmost and basically end of the North American highway system. So you can drive from anywhere where the three of us find ourselves tonight, the Northeast or Kentucky. You can drive to there, and that is like the end of the road. I mean, that's as far as the road goes, and there's still so much more of Alaska past that is only accessible by boat or plane, and all these isolated communities. So yeah, it really feels like you're at the end of the earth in certain areas, and it's just amazing. Like I said, and the people up there are incredible. I met so many amazing Alaskan people, transplants, people that have moved up there, people that have experience in the bush. They grew up in Alaska, Alaskan natives, so some of the First Nations people too. And yeah, it's just a place that really, it's just, again, I think it's in a class of its own.
Here's an interesting fact. And years ago, I was at a private investigation seminar, and there was actually a gentleman from Nome, Alaska. And something I did not know was that every year they get a check from the government for oil royalties.
Yep.
And it's pretty substantial.
It's like I think it was $1,300 this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's like, so every Alaskan citizen gets a kick.
Yep.
Which is kind of cool.
It is cool. I mean, hey, the cost of living is expensive up there.
And if you have a wife, she gets the same kick too.
Yep.
I believe everybody gets a check, regardless, no matter how old you are or whatever, and no matter if you're an Alaskan citizen, they cut you a check as part of a royalty off the oil. So that's like very, very interesting.
Money.
The Simpsons movie a few years ago, they had it when Homer goes up to Alaska, and they're saying that the Alaskan government is paying him to live there. They pay people to move to Alaska. That's kind of what they're sort of talking about.
Right.
It's really cool. Yeah. So they get that check every year. I don't know if it's gone up or not with inflation. I'm not sure, but I think I read something that it was like $1,400 this year. So there you have it.
Yep.
So basically like the stimulus checks from a few years ago.
Yeah. Very, very, very interesting.
I used to work with the guy that helped build the pipeline up there. So he was up there, many decades ago. And, his thing, he made really great money, but his thing was the cost to live there.
Yeah, it's
incredible.
It is one of the most expensive cost of living in the U.S., I believe. So what you have there in Alaska, at least what I noticed is, if you're very well off, or you have and a lot of the jobs up there are actually a lot higher paying than they are in other parts of the U.S. I mean, I got buddies up there that, they do like psychology work, that sort of stuff, and they're making a lot more than that same job in other parts of the lower 48, just because there's a higher demand. So yeah, you have a lot of really wealthy people that move up there because you just need that sort of money to really exist, and then you have a lot of poverty as well. So it's kind of, I don't want to say there's not a middle, but at least from what I observe, you definitely need quite a bit to live comfortably up there, just because everything is so expensive. Everything gets shipped up there, which is kind of ironic because all the commerce and everything that goes to the lower 48 from China and other parts of the world goes through Alaska first, essentially, and then down us. But it's, they can't even get some of the Amazon stuff and some of the stuff that we kind of take for granted anywhere in the lower 48. Even if you live in a rural area like myself, it's still, just the virtue of being in Alaska, it's just more difficult for basic kind of things. You have to forego some of those luxuries, perhaps.
Different way of life for sure.
You gotta love it. Yeah.
One of the things I like about it, the people that live remotely, 9 out of 10 of them don't even have an automobile. They'll either have a plane or they'll have a boat. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. Float planes are really common. I got to go out on one, or not a float plane, just a bush plane, actually, very common as well. Float planes, bush planes. A lot of those places, like I said, that aren't accessible by the road system. Yeah, that's actually a picture from a bush plane. I went out with a guy who actually came to our event Monster Fest last year. He had watched some of the small town monster stuff, and we had set a time, and we wanted to do this whole big Alaskan bush adventure where we flew out in the plane, spent a couple days out there. But the weather last year was so bad. We were constantly getting hit with rain, and it was just
that doesn't look too. You got clouds above and clouds below.
My GoPro is strapped to the side there. You can see it on there, and
it was a ride. How scary of a ride?
It wasn't too bad. I mean, I've done scarier rides when, on helicopters with the no doors. We actually did a flight last year, or in 2022 in Alaska, where we went with no doors, and that's the same kind of thing we did in the Adirondacks. You might remember, Steve, for the Journey film. After we filmed with you guys up there near your research location, we went out with the helicopter with no doors on it. That's a little scarier because if you drop something, I mean, it's gone forever. But yeah, I felt like I was in good hands in this plane ride. The guy who was taking me was he was a good pilot. So yeah.
Now, is that clouds beneath you, or is that actually that's clouds as well?
That's clouds. Yeah, there's clouds beneath us and above us. That was the undercast. So down in the valley, you're looking up and it's just a cloudy day, and the pilot, he was looking for openings, so he'd find, let's try this opening and see if it clears out further as you get out into the bush. And unfortunately, the weather was not really great, so we just got a short flight in. But a lot of those really interior parts of Alaska you just can't access via car, so you have to take like a plane ride or something out there.
Yeah, this would be scary because you're in there looking down. Okay, where am I going to land? Well, fly around for a little while and clear off.
What season are they in this particular picture?
This was in July. Yes, this was July last year, and as a lot of the Alaskans had said, that this was the worst summer they'd ever had in Alaska. It rained like half the time, and it was in the 50s and 60s the entire time. So that's not exactly summer to most of us in the rest of the U.S. So it was not desirable, I guess. But we still had a lot of fun, and we got to go out to some cool places. And yeah,
I mean, how strange is it to see snow in July?
It's weird. It's definitely weird, especially at those higher elevations. Even if you're hiking in certain areas, you'll find patches of snow. Again, some in the more mountainous areas. But I mean, for me, it's not that weird, I guess, because there's even parts of the White Mountains here in New Hampshire that will have a few patches of snow, like up on Mount Washington, that you'll see. But this was definitely, when we drove up to Alaska and we're going through parts of British Columbia and the Yukon, it was early June, and there was plenty of snow still, like at very accessible locations. So their spring, basically May starts, and then, I mean, it just goes into full summer mode. When I was there in 2022, we arrived in early May, and there was still a lot of snow everywhere. It was totally gray. All the leaves were down. And by the time we left at the end of May, it was like everything had just bloomed all of a sudden. All of a sudden it was green. The weather was nice. There's no like ease into spring. It's just winter, and then here's summer. And that's, again, you got to really love that kind of thing, because it's not something most people can deal with.
Now, what were the days like? I mean, how much daylight did you have versus nighttime?
So that first year I went in 2022, a couple of the first few nights we were there, especially down on the Kenai Peninsula, which is a little bit further south, we did have a little bit of where it gets dark for about 3 or 4 hours, and we saw some star cover. But by the end of our week stay, it was already to the point where it would never really get fully dark. It would just kind of become this dusk. Mm-hmm. So if you're walking around in the woods, you couldn't really see anything without a flashlight, because it's that thick, temperate rainforest kind of environment that gets dark on itself. And last year when I went to the same area for 2 weeks, I mean, it would never really get dark, right? And it would just be this kind of dusk. But again, you're with the clouds, it made it a lot darker in the woods. So it was still, you need a flashlight to walk around in the woods. But when I was up in Fairbanks, which is 6-7 hours north of the Anchorage area, it's like 1 a.m, and it looks like the sun has just barely gone down and just basically just dips beyond the horizon and then comes back up. It doesn't really get dark. I mean, you know, we were just in Fairbanks for this event when I was there last year, and yeah, you're looking outside and there's people walking at like 1:30, 2 in the morning, and it's like, it's just weird. It's not normal. They have heavy duty shades for a reason up there.
Now, how did that affect your sleep?
You know, actually, I think because I was so tired, and we drove the entirety from East Coast to Alaska in like a week. I was just so exhausted, it didn't really matter. But I found even during the first year we were there, we were told to just bring eye shades, those little, you wear them on like a plane or something. I was told just bring those, and I just would wear that at night just to really block everything out.
Or you could just take a COVID mask and go.
Yeah, just flip it over your eyes, right? Yeah, so that's what I did. We did the heavy duty masks, or the eye shades, whatever, and that worked well. I mean, I don't really have a problem sleeping, I guess, in general. So if I'm tired enough, I can fall asleep in broad daylight. So it didn't affect me. Some people get affected more adversely than others, but yeah.
Yeah, there was an old Pacino movie, and actually Robin Williams was the villain in the movie, and he was a lower 48 cop that got sent up to Alaska to investigate, and he could not sleep. I'm not sure. I think it was called insomnia.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's a common thing up there, that a lot of people do kind of go crazy because of the daylight, and because in the winter you have periods where there's maybe only a couple hours of light, and it's not really full sun is bright in the sky. It's just kind of like that dusk, and it's just dark the rest of the time. And then in the summer it's the opposite. So some people take like melatonin pills and that kind of stuff to help. But yeah, it's just a wild place, and there's a lot of weird crime up there. A lot of people go crazy because it's the end of the road. People go up there to escape things, escape their past. So you have a mix of very eclectic characters up there, and definitely weird criminals out in the bush that are just evading justice. And then people maybe mixed with the lack of sleep, they just turn insane. So there's a lot of really weird missing people cases that are basically just other people, right? That's just strange homicides and that sort of stuff. And it's inspired a lot of different films and movies about it. Even recently, I think True Detective had like a season up there covering that sort of aspect of the weirdness. So yeah, it's a place that really invokes a lot of kind of interesting feelings in people because of how different it is, and how wildlife there is not, it doesn't, like, you go out of town, you have to drive an hour to go find a place where moose and bear might be. No, it's you're in downtown Anchorage, and there's a 1,000-pound moose running around. And then just recently, Larry Beans Baxter had sent me an article. People had been killed. Somebody had been killed by a moose in his hometown or his town where he was a police officer in Homer. So it's no joke. When I was there last in 2022, there was some U.S. soldier was killed at a base out there by a brown bear. So you're not that far out from the woods, and the animals come to you. So I mean, the population of Alaska is only about 700,000 people, give or take, and there's actually more caribou. I think there's like 800,000 caribou in Alaska. So there's just more caribou than there are human beings. Wow. And you're talking about a place that's 3 times the size of Texas. So
now I know there was, we talk about the strangeness, and we're going to segue into the Bigfoot thing here in a second, because I'll get to that. But I do know there was a couple of serial killers that came out of Alaska. The first one was a baker, a very well-known businessman who would pick up women of the night and fly and take them out, to fly them out in his plane and take them out in a remote and hunt them.
Wow.
And that was right. And then there was Israel Keys, who lived in Nome and got snagged because he killed a girl in Nome, a barista, kidnapped her, got it on film with the kidnapping and everything. And eventually, when the FBI got him, they realized, because they got him in Texas of all places. And when they realized with Keys was that Keys was traveling the entire United States killing people.
Oh, man.
And he actually had kill kits. Now, the interesting thing is that he grew up in Washington State in the Puyallup area. and was, his family was living off the grid and very, like I said, very antisocial type of family affair there. But the interesting thing is he has ties to New York State and to Burlington, Vermont. Is that he robbed the bank in Tupper Lake, Vermont, or New York, Tupper Lake, New York, which is about an hour and a half from where I live. And he actually murdered a couple in Burlington, Vermont.
Oh boy.
And but that was one of his stops. And he is thought to be responsible for at least 10 more, but they haven't identified. They may have identified one in New Jersey, but I am almost sure he is responsible for a missing adult that she went missing in 1998 out of Albany. And the tie-in is he owned a house in Constable, New York, which is right on the Canadian border in New York. Well, I've been to Constable. You can literally park on the main road there, and look and see Canada. And the funny thing is he joined the Army in 1998, 3 months after she went missing, but where he enlisted was in Albany, New York. So there was a tie-in to Albany with him and everything. So it's really, really weird stuff. But anyway, I digress. So what do you think with this crazy, not necessarily weather pattern, but the light? What do you think that may do to a Sasquatch, perhaps? How do they? I mean, in the lower 48, we believe that they're mostly nocturnal. But now you have these periods of daylight. And of course, conversely, in the wintertime, you have these periods of nighttime. What do you think that changes their patterns or maybe their behaviors? Because a lot of people say that the Alaskan Bigfoot's a little more aggressive. What say you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it doesn't really affect them all that much. I would imagine they'd be used to it. I mean, because a lot of the other animals that exist up there also just operate. I mean, instead of having to deal with nighttime, they just kind of operate throughout that time. I mean, you have so many large animals, and that's what's interesting about Alaska as compared to maybe other parts of the lower 48. You have pretty much all the mammals are larger. I mean, you do have a lot of the little rodents and those kinds of things and tons of birds, but you're talking about caribou, moose, Sitka black-tailed deer, mountain goats, Dall sheep. So you have these really huge animals. And the moose in Alaska, I mean, I've seen a few of them. Saw one crossing the road in front of me while driving up there this thing was the largest thing I've ever seen in my life. It had to be pushing 1,200 pounds. I mean, a male. And I've seen some big ones. I live in moose country. I have moose here near my house, but our moose are a little bit smaller here in the New England area. You've got, of course, the brown bear up there, the grizzly bear, the Kodiak bear, which is like the largest bear on earth on Kodiak Island. And I think all those animals, they adapt to that environment. Obviously, the bears and those things, they hibernate during the winter months. They burrow like in other colder climates of the lower 48 and in Canada. But the ungulates, they operate all year long, the moose and the caribou and all those critters. So I imagine the Sasquatches, if they're up there, which I believe they probably are, it just seems like there are some great areas of habitat, especially in that southeast panhandle, in the southern part of like the Kenai Peninsula, where you have these temperate rainforests that stay a little bit more mild year round. They're not as brutal or harsh of a climate as, say, even 3-4 hours north of the coast, where you have really those kind of insane winter freezes and everything. The Kenai Peninsula and those coastal areas, they stay a little bit more mild. They don't get as much snow and as much crazy temperatures. And it's that temperate rainforest. So there's a lot of food sources, there's a lot of seafood sources as well. I mean, when we were out there at Area A, we ran into just about every type of animal out there, both terrestrially and in the water. I mean, you're talking humpback whales, orcas, seals, sea lions, sea otters, harbor seals. I mean, you name it. We ran into them, and that's just in the ocean. And you imagine that's a big protein source. A lot of the bears, actually, the coastal brown bears, are the same as grizzly bears, but they grow a little bit larger. I think it's like 100 to 200 pounds larger because they have access to the nutrients from the sea life. They just are bigger. And grizzly bears are in the interior areas. I guess they have to fight a little harder for their food, and they're mostly going after some of those aforementioned deer and the moose and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I imagine the Sasquatches would just it wouldn't affect them as much. Maybe some of the, moving around to darkness. I mean, we don't know what their patterns are really like. We have these assumptions, and I would assume they would just make use of that time period to continue whatever it is that they do, gathering food or stalking prey or just doing whatever.
Alex, Steve got a photo up here of the Chris McCandless bus.
Yeah, I was doing the pose. So that is that's actually the replica bus from the movie that came out like maybe a little over a decade ago. With the Eddie Vedder soundtrack. Yeah, I think it was it Sean Penn who directed the movie, I believe. So that's the Into the Wild movie. A lot of people have seen. That is the actual movie bus that they use, and it's at a brewery in Healy, Alaska, which is just outside of Denali National Park and right down the street from Stampede Trail, which is where Chris McCandless was dropped off. For folks that don't know, he was kind of this wanderer kid that decided to go live in Alaska and ended up dying, less than a year into his stay out there in the Alaskan bush. He was like 20 something miles down this trail, had found an abandoned bus, which looked just like this one, and was living in it, and then ended up dying because he ate a plant that basically killed his whole organism. Oh. He mistook it for another plant. So, and he's kind of idolized in a while, but it's more of a cautionary tale in my view. Alaska is a place where a lot of people go missing and die for very stupid things. As in many places, the number one killer of people is just they're not prepared, and the conditions. They will eat you away. And that's what happened to this guy. And this was in the 1990s, and it was put into an influential book that, of course, then became the movie. So a lot of people make a pilgrimage to that area, and it's one of the most famous kind of missing people or wanderer kind of stories in not only Alaska but in the world. So there's a weird kind of potential Sasquatch tie-in to his story that we investigated in some of our work up there. And I'd actually interviewed a friend of mine who used to work in the Denali National Park, and he had talked about this. He remembers when it happened. It was around the same summer where McCandless died, which I believe was in 1992. And there were these remote cabins out there on the edges of the national park. And Denali National Park is like 6 million acres. It is insane. It's larger than some other states, especially up here in the Northeast. And it's just protected land. But there were these remote cabins that were vandalized to a really weird degree. None of the food was stolen. Things were just vandalized. And it looks like it was most likely probably human caused. But a lot of people speculate maybe those are Sasquatch. Obviously, you can't really confirm or deny that. But what's interesting is that was initially blamed on McCandless, but some of the damage wouldn't have made sense timeline-wise. He was starving and dying, and why would he hike over 10 miles to remove a 400-pound wood stove out of the cabin and bend the sheet metal upwards and just ransack the place and not take the food if he needed food? So it was just a very weird case, and I actually have the official file too that had been filed by the National Park Service, which was given to me by my friend Norm, which was just like a report about the damage, because a couple of the cabins were owned by the park, and I believe some were privately owned, and they were all ransacked. So it was kind of a weird, very malicious destruction. It didn't seem like a bear either. There was no bear evidence.
Question is that 400-pound stove did they ever find that stove, or was it completely gone?
It was just moved outside of the cabin.
Oh, gotcha.
Like it was inside, and it was physically just taken outside, which again is just a really odd thing for at the time McCandless they thought was around 100. He was under 100 pounds because he was slowly starving. Yeah. He had attempted to kill moose and other animals, but didn't know how to preserve the meat. So he had killed a moose, I think, with like a 22. Which is pretty insane. Just shows you can kill anything with a 22 if you try hard enough. But the meat had gone bad, maggots. So he was slowly starving, and that's eventually what led him to eating that plant that it caused him to, I think, vomit a lot, and he couldn't retain any water or anything like that.
Dehydrated,
that's what ended him. And he
no bueno.
Yeah, so it's a great book, and obviously the movie is a great story. It's not something you should do, but it's a lot of people kind of like that story.
Well, yeah, he had a dream. He wanted to go live in the wild and live off Mother Nature, and that didn't work out so well for him.
Well, he's one of many. He's one of many who have tried and failed in Alaska. Unfortunately, Alaska will chew you up and probably won't spit you out. So
it's always good to have a backup plan.
Yeah.
Well, that is Alaska's just nature.
Yeah.
You go out into nature, it's no different.
There's no
Nice
forgiving.
picture of the Alaskan highway there.
Yeah, I have a map on one of the photos that shows kind of the Alaska Highway, which is an interesting story. It's a highway that was built during the Second World War, actually, by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. military that went through Canada. And it was kind of a deal that the U.S. made with the Canadian government, saying we're going to create this highway that will link basically the lower 48 with Alaska. The idea at the time was there were some Japanese attacks on some of the Aleutian Islands, which are these chain islands that go all the way almost over to Russia and Japan. And there had been some battles. So they thought, well, Alaska could be threatened by the Japanese. We need a better route to go up and down. And I don't exactly remember how long it took them to build this, but they did it in an unbelievable amount of time, just how quickly they did it. These guys, they just, from each end, it's a 1,400-mile long highway that starts in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, and goes to right outside of Fairbanks, Alaska. And that's the route. And it goes through, again, British Columbia into the Yukon Territory and then into Alaska. And it's now basically the only major route up to Alaska driving. It's like the only way you can get up there. Yeah. So that is the route that I drove up last year. And along the way, you drive through the northern Canadian Rocky Mountains. And that's what this picture is of. And just some of the areas you go through are so incredibly beautiful. But what I learned really quickly is that there's a ton of Sasquatch sightings and history along this highway as well. I mean, it's so remote. Like you can just walk off any part of that highway and disappear within a few days, just wilderness on either side. So it makes sense that the sightings are along where people are passing through. They're not, 100 miles into the bush where almost nobody goes. There are a few of those that I found in some of my research, but the sightings are pretty much all along the highway. And you're northern British Columbia, of course, which is very remote, and into the Yukon. And I kept running into cool Sasquatch stuff and statues and stories and that sort of stuff.
I had a buddy that was stationed up in, I think it was Fairbanks, I'm not certain. And he told me the Alaskan Highway at that time in the 1970s, it was gravel.
Yeah, it was all gravel.
He drove a gravel road for so many miles. It was just unbelievable.
Tire popping. Yeah, it's mostly paved now,
right,
but there are some sections that are still gravel that they fix every once in a while. And the section when you're getting to the Alaskan border in the northern part of the Yukon, that is just so bad because of these things called frost heaves. Now, Steve probably knows what those are because we have them up here in the Northeast, but these are frost heaves that are like, wow. I mean, it's crazy bumpy and bad just because it's such a remote area and the winter is so harsh up there. And then this is a cool little Sasquatch crossing hotel in Pink Mountain, British Columbia, which has a history of sightings around that area. So they are obviously paying homage to Sasquatch, which originates in British Columbia, but like 1,000 miles south in Harrison Valley area, which is very close to the U.S. border with Washington. So totally different environment. But obviously the story still carries out there. So it was just something cool along the side of the road.
Yeah, rooms, gym, Wi-Fi, man. They got
yeah. It was looking a little run down when we drove past, but
well, whatever else they provided, they just stripped the piece of sign away there.
Yeah.
Probably like the continental breakfast has been ripped off the sign.
Yeah. Last few years, yeah, I'm sure they've trimmed their service. They're actually closed when we drove by, which was early June. So yeah, again, just about a year ago from now.
Now that is just like what a campsite.
Yeah, so we drove. It was my brother and I that drove the entirety of Alaska Highway, and so again, it's 1,400 miles. So we did it in about 3.5 days, but we still had enough time driving a few hours each day to explore, and then we'd camp everywhere along the way. And this was a really cool. This was actually technically in British Columbia, but there's this section of the highway where you cross into the Yukon, you cross back into British Columbia like 5 different times and back into the Yukon. So we were in this final little chunk of British Columbia, and we found this cool campsite on top of a mountain with a view. And I mean, it was just what a place. And this was probably like at 11, 12 at night. And you can see how it's barely even getting dark.
Right. Yeah. Wow. You can still see sunlight hitting the tops of the mountains.
Yep. Yeah.
Any concern about bears?
Yeah, of course. I mean, yep. I mean, we saw a big grizzly on the side of the road up there, and we camped in one area in the Yukon where we found grizzly prints. So I had bear spray. I mean, I did have a firearm with me, but given it was Canada, I had a shotgun that I was transporting with me to Alaska, and there's a whole Canadian permit you go through to do that process. But using that in Canada, obviously, it would be very no bueno since you're just transiting through. But bear spray, vigilance, and that sort of thing, we had to really be careful because there was a ton of grizzlies, especially in that one area in the Yukon we camped. We found big prints everywhere and tons of black bear. We saw more black bear along the road, actually. We probably saw a dozen in one night. Just black bears just eating on the side of the road, and then one big grizzly is the only one that we actually physically saw while driving up. So they're everywhere. They are genuinely everywhere. And yeah, you want to be careful. Everything, all the food needs to be packed away, nothing in the tent, and just complete vigilance at all times.
Now, quick question. How far apart are the gas stations?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So there are little tiny outposts along the Alaska Highway where they will have some gas. But generally what people recommend is when you're driving up, you have at least 1 or 2 spare tires and a jerry can with some gas. So I drove up my RAV4 just because it gets really good gas mileage. And I put a hitch on the back where I just had extra gas. We filled up one of the bigger towns just to have an extra 6-7 gallons just in case. Because let's say I would never really let my gas get beneath half anyway. I would always try to fill up when I'd reach a town with a gas station. Sometimes they'd be closed. So just in case, you'd have a little bit to get you to the next place. So it's I think now in the kind of the current day, it's close enough that you can basically make it from one area to another on a full tank of gas, depending on your vehicle, of course, without really worrying. I mean, if you have something that's a very high gas guzzling kind of car or a truck or something like that, yeah, you probably want to be more vigilant and pack some extra fuel. Yeah, no joke.
Just throw an extra 55-gallon drum in the back there.
Yeah, and luckily also I should say in the summertime is when most people are driving up there. So from like May to probably maybe October, your chances of running into other people are pretty high. Like there will be a few hour stretches where maybe you don't see anybody, but we saw tons of RVers and other people going up to Alaska and coming back. And yeah, so you do run into some other people. I'm sure somebody could help you out, but you don't want to be that guy and get stuck in that situation, right?
And the reason why I'm bringing all this out is just it's such. I want the audience to understand how hard it is just to get up there, to get where you need to be. It's like it's all these considerations that you don't think of. Like for me, going to the Adirondacks, that's like a breeze, a walk in the park compared to doing this. So really, I mean, all your other adventures that you go through probably are easy compared
way logistically easier. Yeah, I mean, it was, and believe it or not, it was cheaper to drive up. Yeah, because again, I was spending a month up there. It was cheaper to drive up because just a plane ticket in summer season from June to September, I mean, it was almost $2,000 for a plane ticket. Plus, you got a rental car. I mean, you're looking at $5-6 grand just to get around running. Whereas you have your own car. I mean, I spent, I think, total in gas last year, that whole trip and on the way back, I think it was maybe around $1,300, I want to say. I have my list somewhere, but I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Yeah, so, let's see. Around that.
I think if I'm going to Alaska, I'm going to take a cruise. That way I can just stay on the boat. Nice, safe distance.
So here we go. I spent $1,153 on gas. So that was, again, that's cheaper than just a plane ticket up there in the main tourist season. Isn't that crazy? So you've got your cruises. The only other way to get up with a vehicle other than driving up is you can take there's a ferry from Seattle that takes you to Southeast Panhandle. A lot of people do that if they're moving up there or moving back. So you don't have a lot of options. Alaska is very much, again, the end of the road.
Definitely not electric vehicle friendly.
No, I heard people have done it. I don't know how. I imagine they probably have some kind of batteries, but
maybe they have a generator or something.
Yeah, but there were no Tesla charging stations in the middle of nowhere, British Columbia and Yukon and Alaska when I was up there, at least.
Wow.
Well, I like the tent idea. I like that. Other than being in bear country, there
you go.
I would probably slept in the RAV there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind car camping, but we figured it was such a so many beautiful places we were driving through. So you can see my setup there with one of my spare tires and my gas on the hitch back there.
I would probably sleep with the door open like that too, in case a bear came in the middle of the night.
I'd be all locked up.
Well, that's another thing when you go out somewhere. if you're staying somewhere away from home and you got to be out a motel bill, I mean, like $160 a night or more, that adds a major expense to your
Definitely.
institution.
Yeah. And especially they know they can charge a premium out there on the middle of nowhere, right? So they'll charge you for sure. And Canada, of course, what's nice is the Canadian dollar is weaker than the US. So, it's still with the US dollar, you're good, but average hotel, yeah, probably 130, 140 for like a really bad, crappy kind of room along the Alaska Highway. And you're in such beautiful camping areas. Why would you even want to do so?
Yeah, I mean like really, like.
Well, especially if you got like a camper. I mean, you can just pull up wherever you want and just enjoy
even if
your
you're
camper.
just sleeping in your car, just
park
it with that view and just knock off for a few hours and get some rest, and look what you're looking at.
Yeah, we did that on the way back because I drove up with my brother. He stayed for a little bit and he flew back. But then on the way back to the U.S. last year in July, my fiance came with me and we actually slept in the car a couple nights.
I mean,
she was a little creeped out by the bear stuff.
Yeah,
Mike said Alex snores loud enough to keep the bears away.
Yeah, that's my natural defense, I guess.
But just that view alone is worth the cost of the trip.
Oh yeah, that's just one of many. That's
unreal.
Yeah.
When I saw this picture, I'm like, oh
yeah,
definitely a top camping place.
And there's a couple of your bears. I take
it. Right on the side of the road. Again, as you're driving up, you see them all over the place.
They just don't care. Like whatever.
They do not care at all. Nope. Yeah. Even the grizzly, he just looked at us and kept going. And we had one bear that came up and he was like sniffing the tire and the gas in the back. But other than that, they don't care.
Yeah. How about this guy and a beautiful red fox there?
Yeah, red fox, plenty of those. We didn't see a lot of smaller critters. We just saw the big animals, but this was probably the smallest of the animals we saw, other than a Canada lynx.
He doesn't seem too shy either.
Yeah, he was just staring at us, man. I mean, I think it's these animals that are close to the road. They're probably just desensitized to people driving and they don't care, or it's just not a threat to them. I don't know which one it is.
Yeah, you're far into them probably, and you're like, what the hell is this?
Doesn't look like it's bothering me. So yeah,
there's a grizz.
There's the grizzly. He was a big boy. Yeah. That was really cool.
Bears scare me. I'm afraid of bears, and I'm not ashamed to admit it.
They're intense, man. And so we're driving, and there's this stretch after you leave. You're basically in the last part of northern British Columbia, heading to the Yukon, and that's where we were seeing so many black bear. We had a counter at this point. We were like, okay, is this number 7, 8? And then we see this guy lumbering on the left side on a little embankment we're on the right side, and we pull over. I'm like, oh, look. And we're like, oh, dude, that's a grizzly bear. That's not a black bear. You can see the shape of the back and everything, and just obviously the bulk and the difference in the snout. And he just kind of walked around, and we were lucky enough to get some video and pictures, and he just kept going on his own. I mean, it was super cool to see.
That's the only thing that would bother me about sleeping in a tent, because you got this little thin piece of nylon between you and that.
It's a comfort thing. It makes you feel like there's a safety, but there's really not.
Of course, there's the story of the grizzly man that documentary that Werner Herzog did.
Timothy, whatever his name was.
Timothy Treadwell.
Yep.
Who spent years, like 4 or 5 years, going up, and the grizzlies were his friends, and he went up there with a new girlfriend, and one of the bears decided lunchtime.
Yeah.
And very tragic story. You don't mess with these guys.
He made the mistake. He trusted his life to the good intentions of a wild creature. You never do that.
You may get away with it once or twice, which is wonderful, but don't press your luck.
Definitely not.
That's what I say about animal. That's what I say. If you can get away with being near a bear once, okay, fine, that's great. I'm not going to try to attempt that ever again.
No. Not a good idea.
Although, it's kind of funny that somebody was telling me that if you think about shark attacks versus bear attacks, you get far more shark attacks than you do bear attacks.
Yeah, I was just in New Jersey last week for an event, and I saw the creek where the Matawan attacks happened in 1916, and it's inspired in Jaws and that kind of stuff. So yeah, sharks are. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because moose are actually statistically more dangerous in Alaska than bears.
Yep.
Because of the amount of people that get attacked by moose. I think people underestimate moose, which is really strange. I don't know why you would. They're scary and huge and not very smart animals.
Well, you think about it. The average bear has a brain maybe the size of a roll, right? but a moose has the size of a brain of a walnut.
Yeah.
And that's why they're just, they don't, a bear sees us and they realize, oh, this is something I should normally says, this is something I'm not going to mess with. This is something I shouldn't mess with. This is an apex predator.
Yeah.
But a moose just doesn't have that filter.
No, yeah. There's, again, just recently fatal moose attack up there. And again, the bear attacks do happen. I mean, the brown bear and the grizzly, they are ambush predators. So they cannot be underestimated under any circumstance.
Right.
But moose are just unpredictable, and they'll just go crazy and they'll stomp you to death.
Guarantee, if I lived up there, I would not go to the mailbox without a Ruger Super Blackhawk strapped on the hip.
A lot of people don't. A lot of people will not go even out to the mailbox there without a gun. I know quite a few people who they're strapped even going, to check the mail.
And they're strapped with like 50 cal guns,
44 Magnum,
44,
357 is the bare minimum there. 10 millimeter and 357 are like backup guns.
Don't expect to go out with a 9 millimeter because
no. Maybe
right
in the
city, bear's head.
Yeah, maybe in the city is like if you're on people like an EDC, but man, 12 gauge up there is a really good choice. Obviously, a lot of people like lever action, so 45-70s. Pretty much, the big bore revolvers too. Obviously, 44 Magnum's really popular. You got the 454 Casull. I mean, so many different. As you start getting into the bigger territory, I carried a 357 mostly, but I also had a 12 gauge as a primary. So because it's hard to beat 12 gauge with some Black Magic Magnum Brennicky load for that. Now
this is area
A.
Hey, look at that beautiful shot there.
Oh man,
and that's probably late at night too.
This was, this is like after midnight, almost 1 a.m. And I mean, you can't really see the mountains there, but there's still sun hitting the tops of the peaks there. And I mean, that's a story. It's probably the coolest case I've had the chance to work on. I mean, location alone and kind of how that happened was back in 2021, I was contacted by a guy who's actually formerly from New England, former military. He lives and works up in Alaska. He had built this property in the middle of nowhere on the Kenai Peninsula, over an hour boat ride from the nearest town. And they just started having weird stuff happen, kind of stereotypical Sasquatch stuff, visually seeing rocks being thrown horizontally out of the woods, weird roaring sounds, knocks, all that, the whistles, some of the sort of stuff. And he thought it was weird. And he would contact people from the area and they'd be like, oh yeah, that's like Sasquatch stuff. He's like, man, what are you kidding? Like, this is serious. Like, we're not joking around here. He's a guy again who's very professional character, former military, big game hunter, fisherman, like lives and dies for this kind of stuff. And he was like, this is not a joke. We're having some weird stuff happen. And started talking to other people. I believe was in touch with folks like Doug Hychek and Jeff Meldrum and others initially. And then started saying, well, maybe there is something going on here. And then he started letting kind of people come out and do some research and try to get to the bottom of it. And that's where people like Larry Beans Baxter had gotten involved. And Beans started going out there on trips. And then he had reached out to me because he had watched, I believe, an interview I did with Beans back in 2021. And he saw, oh, you're also from the New England area. I'm originally from there. We kind of hit it off based off of that. And then he said, the invite is open. Like anytime you guys want to come out here. And it took us about a year, so spring of 21, and then it was May of 22 that we finally made it out there. And we were doing in conjunction with a big production with Small Town Monsters and Seth, and they were doing parallel filming while we spent a week out at this cabin location and just had, obviously a blast being in a place like this and just exploring the landscape and really kind of trying to take it all in and showcase the area.
Now, the $1 million question is, what weird experiences did you encounter on your first trip there?
Yeah, the first trip there was definitely more, I would say, eventful than the second trip. My second trip, which was 2 weeks long, so half of my Alaska trip was out there last summer, had almost nothing happen. It was like completely silent, typical when you're out there, right? 99% of the time. But that first year, we had a couple of weird kind of wood knock, rock throw type things happen. At least we believe so. I mean, we can't say with 100% certainty that any of it was absolutely a Sasquatch. We didn't see it. We also heard these mysterious gunshots a couple times that would just happen. And we know there's nobody there. And I've had people suggest, well, could just be someone in like a different bay or something like that, or somebody in the mountains. I'm like, well, to get there, I mean, we would see them. We would see a boat come in. We would see a plane. You'd have to see them because you're in a bay. Even this last summer when I was out there, the weather was a lot worse. And we had a couple of people from the Gulf of Alaska that would come in and take refuge in this cove. And you'd notice them coming in. I mean, it was very obvious that there's somebody coming in. They anchor out in the middle of the bay for the night, and then in the morning they leave. They're just trying to get away from the really harsh Gulf of Alaska kind of weather and everything like that. So, yeah, mystery gunshots. And we found this really weird handprint on the backside of the cabin that is just very strange. It's like a 50-50 chance that it's either something Sasquatch-like or a primate-like, I should say, or a human being. It's not like it's a moose misidentified or a bear print. I mean, it has dermal ridges and everything on it. So that's something that we still have. The samples were collected and were given to Doug Hychek and it's part of Legend Meets Science too. So I don't know the results on that yet, but yeah, we had a whole host of kind of stuff happen. Just again, a lot of it like that stereotypical potential Bigfoot stuff that is so inconclusive, but maybe when you add it up together, it kind of it fits purported behavior, but I can't say obviously.
Now, quick question: when you heard the tree knocks, what was the temperature at that time?
So that was the one night we heard them. We were up on this campfire, which is above where the cabin is. It's like a short walk, a few minutes in the woods.
I think I have a picture of that somewhere.
Yeah, you probably do. It's on like a cliff, and we were sitting around. It was myself, Eli, this guy, my buddy Ron Reed, and Rob Roy Menzies up there. He runs the Bigfoot Art Gallery in Alaska. He's been to the property quite a few times. We were just sitting there hanging out at the fire pit for quite a while. We had cameras, thermals, everything, and it's maybe about like almost 2 a.m. at that point, if I had to guess. Pretty chilly. I mean, it's got to be high 40s, maybe mid 40s. So it's not very warm. Again, this was in May, so this was right when spring was kind of kicking off up there. And within a week of that, again, it was like summer just came into effect.
So that being that temperature, that kind of rules out that the popping you're hearing is not expanding and contracting of the trees, which happens when you start getting into the mid to low 20s. The trees start cracking.
Yeah,
sound like popping. That's the reason why I asked that question.
Oh, absolutely.
Being Alaska, not familiar with what kind of temperatures you have.
Absolutely, and you know, it would have been, you know, less something I'd emphasize if we didn't have other things happen with it. So we would hear the wood knock that would break the silence as we're just chit-chatting around the fire. And then what I could only describe sounds like an object or a rock falling from or being thrown from the side of this kind of hill we're on, hitting stuff along the way down, and then hitting rocks and then splashing into the water, because the shore there is covered with some rocks and that sort of stuff. So that happened a few times, and we're just kind of flabbergasted. And we have audio of it. It's in some of our Alaska videos. And we would hear this knock, and it was a very weird sound because it was very similar to a percussion instrument that we actually have there at the cabin, which is something that they would just use, and it's like this South American thing where you just hit it and it makes a really like nice crisp knock. It's almost like one of those bells, but it's made of wood, and there's one with plastic actually too. And so it sounded very similar to that, which was weird. And we heard a few of the knocks and what sounds like these rocks being thrown. Again, can't say 100% because we didn't see anything, and we don't believe we tried to emulate it. The problem with that area is you have moss covering the entirety of the ground. So finding any rocks is kind of difficult. The only ones we had was the ones we had assembled around the campfire. But you know, we tried dropping, let's roll them down this hill, see if they splash into the water, see what it sounds like. Half the time the rocks would get snagged and caught up on stuff on the way down. The only way to do it was, hey, throw the rock at this tree and it smashes the side of the rocks on the beach and splashes loudly into the water. Because we also thought, okay, what if it's just there's some animal splashing in the water? I mean, we've got seals out there. We have sea lions. We have sea otters. They all can slap and make these kinds of noises. But it was the other stuff precluding that, or right before it, that was it didn't just emanate from the water. Because we did hear nights where we'd hear slapping and there's a seal, and then you hear and the sea lions. I mean, I have this audio. I remember reviewing the audio, and I'm like, oh my God, we got something crazy. And then I realized it's just a sea lion going, ah. It's scary. I mean, you're thinking Sierra sounds. You're like, oh my gosh. And then it's just a sea lion.
This is a saltwater bay here, Aleks?
Saltwater bay. Yep. Okay. This is connected to the Gulf of Alaska. So if you look at a map of the Kenai Peninsula, we're in kind of that southern coast area, which is hundreds of miles, and it all looks the same. It's the same area as the infamous Port Chatham. It's the same areas where Les Stroud, is that my cat? Same area where Les Stroud had his kind of weird encounter. It's just these remote kind of coastlines, and it's all connected to the ocean. So we would have orcas and humpback whales right in this bay just pop up, and incredible drone footage of these animals. Just, we were woken up one morning by the cabin owner and Robert and some of the other guys saying, whale, you guys got to get out here. And we're watching these humpback whales for a few hours. I mean, it was just amazing. It's like a National Geographic right outside your house. It's crazy.
And the water looks relatively calm. To see those in such calm water that close is amazing. I mean, I've seen humpbacks on the ocean.
Yeah.
But I couldn't imagine seeing them in a nice calm, like in
it's just because it actually drops off pretty much in there, and there's a lot of little like smaller fish and things that exist kind of in these sort of bays and these coves, and there's just bays and coves all over the place out there. So yeah, I mean, we saw orca pods entire last year. We were following them with the drone, and we're following them with the boat, kind of just observing them from a distance without harassing them, and it was just such a cool experience, man.
No, dude, you went in the water with them things? No way.
No, I didn't swim with them. My friend did fall in with his kayak, though, when we did some sea kayaking, which was terrifying. That was absolutely scary experience. We were using these sea kayaks, and they're a lot narrower and longer than normal kayaks. So the balance is very freaky, and we were pretty far away from the cabin, and my friend Ron, and I'm panicking. The water's freezing. I don't want him to try to drag me in by accident, because as I'm sure you know, Steve and Chris, people, when they get in the water and they're nervous, I mean, they just grab on anything. He did have a life vest, of course, but I had to secure him on the back of my kayak and try to get me to the shore. Luckily, the other guys were in the boat at the time. They were doing some fishing, and they came to our rescue and got us. But it was like a scary scenario, because you're going down in an area like that. The water's just, I mean, it'll get you pretty quick. So we were able to get him back to the cabin and get the wood stove going, and he was okay. And it's in the video. I mean, I was asking him, like, is it okay if I put it in the film? I mean, it's almost like a PSA of how to be careful and just stay calm in these kinds of scenarios. Because, I'm not going on a sea kayak anytime soon. I'll tell you that.
No, I would not get out on a boat and go out there with killer whales and stuff swimming around. No way. No.
Yeah, not a little boat. Yeah. There's a bear track we found up on this, very high up on this mountain. We were over 1,000 feet above where the cabin is, and that's the view you can see. Just, I mean, absolutely incredible with the those big trees and everything. And again, it's a temperate rainforest, so that environment is just very lush and green. Amazing how much food sources are out there.
There's a reminder: you are not alone.
Yep, and that's just a black bear. That wasn't even a brown bear, which we're lucky,
The snow has. Can you put that one back up there, Steve? It's. You have some particular features there. Everybody needs to look at. You see the claw marks at the end of the toes.
Yep. It's not a big footprint. No one's claiming that. It's obviously it's a bear, right? It was fresh. We were climbing up. We were bushwhacking up this mountain. It was crazy bushwhack, and we came upon these fresh tracks. So he must have been right ahead of us. We might have pushed him out of the area. At least that's what we assumed.
Bear.
Fresh.
That's why you hike with a 12 gauge out there.
Amen. Yeah.
So this is a picture of the handprint after Larry Beans Baxter had dusted it with some of the powder, like the police stuff that they use. I wanted him to collect the sample because I said, he's got the law enforcement background. I'm not trained in that stuff. This is the original. That's the one as we found it. And then that's after he dusted it. He had actually collected some of the samples and then had dusted it and tried to lift it with a kind of this tape thing you put up on it.
Now, did anybody hear that?
No, we didn't hear it. We actually, the theory is that maybe this happened before we actually showed up. Luckily, the first year we were there was almost no rain the entire time, which is pretty unheard of for a temperate rainforest. For almost a week of no rain. Last year when I was there, 2 weeks, it rained. We had maybe 2.5 days of sunshine. It rained the entire time. Crazy. So stuff like this doesn't last very long, but they're having a very kind of dry spring into summer there, and we think that maybe it happened in between because there was a previous trip to the cabin less than a week before then we went out there on that first trip. So we thought maybe something came down. I mean, I don't know. Could be human. That's obviously a possibility. And I had sent this along to a few people that are obviously educated in this kind of stuff. I'd sent it to Jeff Meldrum, first of all. And then Mike Ann had actually, Tactical Bigfoot Research, had hooked me up with a former professor of his who did some dermatoglyphic stuff. So I sent that to him. I believe he's a professor in the SUNY system. I don't recall his name. I have the email somewhere, but he had told me he remembers working with Grover Krantz and others back in the day in like the 90s with the dermatoglyphic stuff. And he remembers Krantz talking about the Sasquatch stuff. And he initially had said he thought it was a bear, which I thought was kind of funny because there's dermal ridges there. And then he admitted, well, I haven't done dermatoglyphic stuff in like 20 years. So he referred me to a colleague of his who I then sent the emails and these photos to. And he said he did believe it was probably human, but he doesn't discount the idea that there could be something like a Sasquatch still out living in remote areas, which I thought was really interesting from somebody who's a bona fide academic that is not somebody who's into the Bigfoot stuff at all. This is just a person I randomly was able to be referred to. And it was just cool to include that in my film about it. But yeah, it was just, yeah.
I like the dermal ridges. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird. I was going out to change the audio recorder battery one day. It was towards the end of our first week, and I'm thinking to myself, I remember Doug talking about all that Alba Vernick stuff, and I was just kind of thinking about them. Like, let me just walk around this cabin real quick, and that's the kind of metal siding that's along the cabin. Right. And I just found this, and it was underneath this window that they've had some weird stuff happen there in the past, and it was in a weird angle, the handprint. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. And I called everybody out. I'm like, can you guys remember doing this or anything like that? And they were like, no, I don't think that was us. So, I mean, again, it's a possibility that it's human. That can't discount that at all. But it's not like it's a bear or a moose rubbing up against, it's
from palm to fingertip, 8 inches.
It was like a little more even, I think, with the middle finger, which was, I believe, the longest. We tried comparing, and all of us had like average sized hands there, and it was we were a little bit smaller than it. So again, not out of the realm of possibility for being a person, but it was just something we felt we should document, and then also have somebody with a proper data collection background collect. And then that was obviously sent off. So Larry did us solid with that stuff.
So what you want to do is, and of course you were talking, you use something like this. This is lift tape.
Yeah, that's probably exactly what he used. Yeah, he did a whole video documenting the.
Then what I carry is I use these little evidence cards made specifically for lift tape. Yeah, where you put the portion with the print on one side, and then you can document time, date, and keep that chain of custody going.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So what actually would happen was Beans wasn't with us when we found it, but he went less than 10 days later back to the cabin with the owners. This was after we left. And the print had already deteriorated a little bit, which shows you that any amount of rain will have stuff like handprints deteriorate pretty quickly. But he was able to get enough that he swabbed like 4 or 5 different samples from the fingertips in some of the areas and put those in the little tubes. Yep. And again, he did a whole video documenting his documentation and then the lift tape. And that was sent primarily to Doug Highcheck. So we're still kind of waiting to hear if anything is up with that. And
it frustrates me to no end. I watched this video from this guy who allegedly is having all this Bigfoot stuff going on in the Adirondacks, on where I'm not quite sure, but he alleges that there was this handprint on his window and whatnot. And you see him dusting it, which I find, very precocious that, well, maybe he's getting them and he bought the stuff. But the first thing you should do with any type of print now, because of the advances in DNA, is buccal swab a portion of that. Yep. Because the hands, or any primate hand for that matter, or even animal paw, will emit the oil.
Yeah.
You can't feel it, but it does leave oils behind when you leave a fingerprint, and they can actually get DNA out of that now. So, in terms of crimes now, if you leave a fingerprint, you're leaving your DNA as well.
Yeah, and that's what's great about a surface like this. It's this kind of metal siding, and we weren't able to do this as easily. We tried to push our handprint in another area to try to kind of like debunk or emulate it. Mm-hmm. The only way I was able to get it super clear was I wet my hands a little bit with some lotion, and I just kind of did that. But one of the professors had told me that I reached out to, he had said, sometimes when people are doing hard labor, chopping wood, the kind of stuff you would do at a remote cabin, your hands will secrete some of those oils. So you maybe that could be one of the possibilities that maybe pressed it up against the side of the cabin, didn't realize it.
Now, quick question:
Absolutely possible.
how tall, how high up was that?
I
Particular
don't have a picture that I took on my phone, but it was like at least it was a little over eye level for me, actually, I believe. So it was a very weird kind of spot, and there was this water thing in the back there that you would have had to have either climbed up on it or gotten past it. It was kind of an awkward angle. In the film, The Alaskan Coastal Sasquatch Part 2, there's the video of that whole backside when we're finding the print. You can see that there. I guess I just don't have like a zoomed out picture that I sent to you. But it was this window right under this bunk room, which has 3 beds where we stayed when we were there, and a bunch of other people have stayed, and people say they've had some weird stuff happen at that cabin, at that part of the cabin. The first year when they were building it, something tried to break in through the bottom there and managed to knock like a 70-pound cooler, went flying across the room, and they thought it was a bear. And they're clearing the way with shotguns, and they're like, "Move, bear, bear!" And they hear what they describe as something bipedal, kind of running up the hill. And there was a lot of that sort of more aggressive stuff being reported the first few years after the cabin was built. I mean, regular rocks being thrown, other strange stuff. Again, the sort of stereotypical stuff you hear with the sort of Sasquatch topic. So, yeah.
Well, the things I like about it are the dermal ridges, because right away that throws the bear out of the equation.
That's exactly. It's a more clean cut possibility. It's a 50-50, And again, as I said, it could absolutely turn out to be somebody accidentally just pressed their hand up and didn't realize it at some point. But none of us could recall doing it on that trip. And it was in an area of the backside of the cabin that no one's really spending time at. Right. You wouldn't really be there for whatever reason. There's a deck in the front. That's where we all hang out. And that's elevated, and it's purposefully elevated so bears don't get up there.
And the fact that it was located near a window where something could be peeping in.
That's what we found interesting. Yeah. So,
interesting. Yeah.
And then hopefully there was enough DNA there that Doug is able to determine for Legend Meat Science 2. I don't know. We're still, again, it's almost been over 2 years now. We're still waiting on the results, but as we know, these things take a while. And I wish at the time we had saved more of the samples so we could send them to say Darby or Cut. But this was it was like a year before he even announced it, I believe. I had actually been in communication with Darby before my second trip, which was a year ago. This was right before he was announcing it. Just in case I did find something, I said, Darby, I want first person I send it to, I want to send it to you. And we didn't really find anything that it was worth sending. So yeah.
Very cool.
At least the second.
Let's go to area.
Yeah, this is just the second year. So
this is 2023.
Yep. This was a weird print we had found on the opposite side of the bay we were at. We were exploring, trying to find this old cabin that was rumored to be up in the hills up there. It was on National Forest land out there. So we don't know what was up with that place. And we just would find these weird prints there in the moss. There's a couple of other ones I have. Let me see if I can pull up my Scaniverse here. Yeah. I can kind of show you. This is with the 3D scanner. You can maybe kind of see it on my phone.
Yep. Actually, let me see if I can.
Wow. You can pretty deep.
Yeah, it was very deep. I mean, so there's the scan. So you can kind of see, I believe it was around 10 inches. So not a huge track, but that moss out there, I mean, you press into it even where we walk, unless you damage the moss, I mean, it'll sponge back out very quickly.
Right.
So there you can kind of see that, and you can see
something with some weight.
It's like it stepped on a stick right there too. Again, I apologize. I'm trying to hold this steady as I can. So that was we found a series of those just up there in the moss on the sides of these hills. And I mean, it could be a bear slipping. Sure. Absolutely possible. Or maybe, I don't know about Sitka black-tailed deer. They're definitely smaller with their kind of the hooves, but we would find a bunch of this kind of stuff. And that's just one of the ones I had in a still frame from one of the videos where, we're going up to find this cabin that looks like no one's been there in a long time. And we're finding this. So
looking at the enlarged print, it looks like there's a deer impression to the right of it.
Yeah, there could very well be. I mean, we followed, there's mountain goat trails out there. There was Sitka blacktail deer. And it's funny, Sitka blacktail are actually not supposed to be in this part of the Kenai Peninsula, if you ask like the state of Alaska. But we were able to conclusively prove that they are We found jawbone. We found we have trail camera videos of them, and we also used a thermal drone out there while we were there last year, and we had video of my buddy Damon flying his thermal drone up into this mountain valley as we're just sitting at the cabin. He's like, "Oh, look, heat signature." We go in, and lo and behold, it's just a black-tailed deer sitting there looking at us at the drone. Like, what the heck is this thing? And we found multiple other individuals on thermal drone, which shows it's a great tool, of course, something that's awesome to use in the field, especially in a vast area like that, both in daytime and in nighttime. So, yeah, there's tons of critters out there. So you do have a lot of culprits that could cause maybe like a slide. This was a hair sample we found on the side of a different cabin. Now, we expected, what do you guys think this is, just based off looking at it? I'll tell you the answer, but if you had to guess. It kind of surprised us what it actually was. There's this blondish kind of long hair.
Well, I know what it is from looking at the.
You probably saw the pictures,
right.
Yeah.
but what I notice, and I don't know if anybody else notices, but I know it because I put the slides together. But in looking at this, the coloration, to me, it doesn't look like Sasquatch hair. Not quite as long as it should be. But what I do notice is that there is a scratch mark just to the left of the post. I don't know if you can see. I'll try to pointer it. Yep. Right there is a distinct scratch mark.
Yeah. So that we had found this clump of hair on the side of this cabin. There were scratch marks in other areas. So this is myself kind of collecting it.
Oh, that's way up. Okay.
So that's what we're thinking. Okay.
Okay.
We thought for sure it was a bear, right? Probably a brown bear. Maybe it was trying to get into this. Is this old cabin out there? Maybe it's just trying to get in or whatever it's doing, and it gets clipped on the side as it's walking by. So I didn't send it obviously to Darby or Cut. I didn't feel like it was. I feel like we knew it was some kind of one of the normal animals reported there. So we sent it for testing to Cindy Dosen, who did just the microscopic analysis. Right, she's just looking at the hairs under a microscope, and I see a lot of interesting guesses in the comments. Deer, nope. Mountain goat, nope. Horse, definitely not. It was actually of the feline variety. It's a lynx. Yeah, and then there's the picture. So it's a Canada lynx, which is the only feline up in Alaska. They don't have mountain lions. Well, the mountain lions are kind of like a cryptid up there in certain areas. They rumored to be seen, but this was determined to be a lynx, and we believe we have audio of the lynx screeching in other kind of audio that we got from out there. So yeah, it just shows you a cat is a cat, and they will jump up on the side of a cabin and do whatever they do. And yeah, we did not expect that result. We're thinking, oh, it's definitely a brown bear. Could be like one of the cinnamon black bears, maybe. They get that coat. I saw a few of them up there in Alaska, and yeah, it was a Canada lynx. So there was the importance we felt of you find any kind of evidence, whatever you think it is, and just send it in to somebody who has some kind of a background that can look at it, even if it's not a DNA analysis, it's just microscopic hair analysis. And hey, it's a good way to get your result.
If I'd have walked around the corner of that building and saw that high up off the ground, the first thing I would have done is went, "Oh my God."
Yeah, we're thinking like somebody with broad shoulders walking by. I mean, they'd nick it and get stuck, and bear. So a lynx would have been way shorter than the height of that hair. So
there's a great example of how to collect evidence there. It's going into a paper envelope.
Paper bag.
It's you're gloved up, you're using tweezers, and you're masked up.
Yeah, we just I'm not trained in this stuff, but I wanted to obviously talk to people who are and just listen to their suggestions. And
the only advice I would ever give out is before using the tweezers, take a lighter to the tips of it, heat them up so you're burning off any kind of DNA that may have been contact DNA for a while it was sitting in your pouch. Or
luckily, these tweezers were in a fresh pack that I had
beautiful.
Just opened. So now I have them in my pack. They're opened because those are new ones. I'll do the burning technique, but I haven't found anything since then that's worth collecting.
Or you can what you can do if you really want to sterilize it, put it in boiling water for about 5 minutes.
That's a great.
Let it cool down, pull it out, and then with gloves, put it into another envelope, baggie, seal it, and leave it.
Smart.
That's what I would
Yeah,
do.
you know, I bet you that cat lost that much hair, he was probably making some noise over that.
Yeah, some nail sticking out or something. So however he got caught. Yeah,
So
maybe that's the audio we have of the
It's
screeching.
amazing.
yeah, you're like, ow.
Because I'm here listening to this audio and I'm like, what? This sounds like a cat to me, man. And this is audio actually from the previous year. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds like it's obviously not not like a bear or anything. It sounds feline. So this is cool. Willow footprint.
So here's the story.
Okay, this is cool, right? So this is a footprint that I was actually shown last year, or in 2022, the first year we went out there. We went to this thrift store that was reported to have a Bigfoot footprint in Willow, Alaska, which is right near Hatcher Pass, which is like an hour and a half north of Anchorage. So you're close to Wasilla, the famous place where Sarah Palin said she could see Russia from. Not true. But that's the town. And so we went to the store, and that first year, the lady wouldn't let us take pictures or video of the track. She said, oh, I rescued this from a house where somebody, the wife had died and the husband, he moved out and the house was crumbling. And I went in and I rescued the footprint and I kept it at my store. And so she wouldn't let us take pictures or photos. So I'm like, oh, whatever. So in our video from last year, we drew, myself and Eli, we drew the track to the best of our abilities. And then at some point last year, I got an email from somebody who had seen that very track. They saw our video and they're like, oh, I know what track you're talking about. I knew the owners. And so I have the pictures now, and that's what you're seeing here. And then the email that accompanies it was her explaining it. And just, I know the person who owned this cast in 2010. I'm sure she did not give it to anyone, and that is sitting in a closet, a shelf somewhere. And the story we were told by the store owner was that this lady had actually passed away, and her husband, they found this print. And there are other pictures, I believe, in that sequence, Steve, which will show the photo. And so once I got the actual pictures, I said, okay, I'm going to send this to some of the best people I know to look at this kind of stuff, people like Jeff Meldrum. So I sent it to him, and Jeff was like, I'm pretty skeptical. This doesn't look right. He thought the shape of the foot looked very odd. The toes didn't look right. And so we were able to basically debunk it, and we didn't think it was legit. And I was just going off of memory because I didn't, I guess I could have been a jerk and recorded secretly, but I don't usually do that kind of stuff. I'm not that kind of filmmaker. When the lady said, you guys can look at it, and we looked at it, and then we drew it. As soon as we got back in the car, we drew it just to kind of preserve our memory. And it was pretty close, but it was cool to be sent pictures of it. And it's definitely the same track. I mean, I recognize it. And the story kind of matched up. So
there's some interesting features on that cast. There's that instep there is kind of odd.
That's what makes it very
right.
that's what puts it in doubt.
Yeah, and the length of the big toe also.
Very strange. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I was like, oh man, it looked amazing because I'm thinking off of my memory, and I had 2 minutes under pressure to look at it without a photo. And then it was really cool to get the actual photos and show them to people, be like, hey, what do you guys think of this? And people and I believe Cliff had said he had already seen this track before when they filmed up in Alaska for Finding Bigfoot like over a decade ago. He had said that they'd looked at it or something. I don't know if it was on the show, but he was aware of it. So yeah.
Well, to me, the instep, makes it questionable. But now I had seen tracks here in Kentucky where that feature was on the outside of the foot, on the opposite side rather than the side of the big toe. So that wouldn't be a deal breaker if it had a little narrowing place there, kind of like an instep, but on the opposite side.
Yeah, I'm looking at this, and I always warn people about a Bigfoot having an arch, or where the heel of the foot is at a different angle than the toes. And if you look at this print, the heel of the foot seems to be going off at like 100 degrees, maybe 110 degrees.
Yeah.
Whereas the foot is straight at 90. And when you have that hook in there, it's either indicative of somebody hoaxing a track and not realizing, a Bigfoot doesn't have an arch, or two, a bear overstep. So where the for whatever reason, the one of the paws is, or the back paw may have came down on top of the front paw as it's walking. Right. And because of the angles of the paws being different causes that bend. But what I do find interesting is why that little divot in the big toe.
Yeah.
And when you look at the big divot, you got to think that, and it's so hard to do sometimes, but that means there would be a bulge in the crease of the big toe. Not a depression, but a bulge. Remember, when you look at a track, it's
Right.
a reverse image of what you're of actually is in the ground.
Yeah, that'd be weird.
So I'm not quite sure. What it looks like is somebody, at least in me looking at this.
I don't think it's a bear. I don't think.
No. I think to me it looks like somebody was drawing the toes, right, by kind of just mushing their fingers in. And when they did the big one for the big toe, it didn't look big enough, so they tried another one, and that's why you have that strange crease in the middle there.
Right.
So what they actually did was they dug their finger in deeper to get that impression, and it caused that line. So that's what it looks like to me. And the bend in it, like the heel, doesn't look right at all. Or I should say, actually, not the heel, but the direction of the heel looks wrong, and the middle looks way too narrow for it to be a very pliable type of foot that we would expect. The reason why they call them Bigfoot is not necessarily because of the length, but more because of the width. One has to keep that in mind as well.
That's interesting.
But cool. I mean, really great.
Oh, yeah.
And again, you're doing exactly what I preach, is that we're not the scientists. We're the investigators. We go out, we collect the evidence, and we ship it off to science, let them make that determination. And I think that's huge.
Yeah.
That's why credibility stands with folks like you and Seth and everybody, getting the right stuff out to the right people, and Eli, and maybe occasionally Tate.
Yeah, no, I just think it's important. Again, like, I'm not trained in this stuff, but I'm trying my best. If I find something good, I want to be able to send it out to a Darby Orcutt or Cindy Dosen or a Jeff Melder, and just be like, hey, what do you think of this? Get some other opinions. Or obviously that was so cool when Tactical Bigfoot Research Mike hooked me up with his old professor who literally did this stuff, knew Grover Krantz, knew all these people. I mean, that was such a cool connection to make. And, I've tried my hand at reaching out to other academics before, and I've hit a bit of a brick wall with some of them.
Yeah.
Some people that have just been either not want to respond, or they just laugh it off. But it was really cool to see a few of them. They were like, hey, we're not at all, uninterested in this. We think there may be something to it. And they're kind of willing to tell you a little bit about it. And I thought that was really cool. So yeah, it's cool to have a repository of folks you can kind of reach out to with stuff
I was actually trying to get a psychologist on the show that has his own podcast. That no response.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The worst thing I ever had was I was doing this audio video about alleged wood knocks and theorizing stuff and alternatives, and there was this group in the Congo that does this trail camera project with chimps, and they have all these really cool videos of chimps throwing rocks at trees and almost wood knocking sort of stuff. And I asked that nonprofit group, hey, do you think, is there any chance I might be able to get your permission to use this video in a different video about some, I kind of tiptoed around it, some Sasquatch kind of stuff. And the response I got back was pretty scathing. I think it's probably the worst. It was like, we do not want to be involved with this kind of stuff, and Bigfoot's definitely not real, and all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, you could have just said no. It was like she went out of her way. And then I looked her up, and she turned out to be some politician in the European Union. So I'm like, oh, okay, it checks out now.
Right.
It was very. I remember sending it to a couple of people. I probably sent it to Mike too at the time, and it was just like, geez, man. Tell me what's bothering you without telling me.
Yeah, I have a video coming out either tomorrow at some point or Tuesday. And again, I was being nice. I could use it under fair use, but I was being nice through it. So I'll see if I get an answer back from them. I actually showed him the slide I was going to use it with. But so there's going to be a mid-cut video this week, folks, too, as well. So yeah. So out of didn't see any Bigfoot, found some, I think your trackway, let me go back to that one. I think that one to me has a little more provenance to even to that because you can tell there's no arch. There is, and actually it's kind of funny because it has that strange where it seems like the middle toe seems to be the longest one. That's very similar to the Ford Ancast. Ford Ancast has that similar toe structure.
Well, and yeah, what's obviously, as you know, Steve, here in the Northeast, it's a very difficult substrate in general. I mean, we have a lot of that leaf litter, run into that plenty. There, it's a different type of difficult because it's this moss that, I mean, unless you really destroy or damage the moss, again, your print, you may step somewhere gently. Within a couple hours, it'll sponge back up and bounce back out. So tracks don't last that long. And there was really, I mean, the year prior to that, to this one, we had found this really weird, almost like what looked like something sitting, and there was like foot scuff marks and very big kind of impression where something was sitting, where it looked like something was sitting. And the guys had reported on a previous trip to the cabin that they had felt like something was watching them from there, and they had this really weird thermal hit from there. And that's in the first Alaska coastal Sasquatch. But so that moss, unless you damage it on purpose, it doesn't really hold tracks that well. So that was interesting for sure.
But, you know, you do notice that there seems to be a lot of substrate pushed to the back. So I'm wondering if that's what caused the damage to the moss when it stepped off. It was kind of pushing off a little bit.
Yeah, and again, there was a few more in this sort of trackway that's in, it's a series called Dark Coast, Hunt for the Alaskan Bigfoot. It's a 5-part series about my 2-week trip last year. So that one's just basically all about, you know, this kind of stuff. And that shows a few other tracks where it was kind of in a line, and we were like, this is weird, man. The best we could do is just document it, 3D scan it, get some photos. I know my foot for a scale object is not great there.
Is that a 4-leaf clover?
Luck of the Alaskans, right?
Sure does look like 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
But that's what I love about scans or tools like Scaniverse, where you can just take a 3D scan and then you can get your pictures and then cast it if you have the right materials. Is just you get these awesome 3D scans and you can then send this to people. You can upload it to the website. You can do all sorts of stuff with these tools. So props to people like Matt, Central Florida Bigfoot, and Mike Ann, who really kind of got me on board with the 3D scan stuff. It's been hugely useful out in the field.
Myself as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much you can do with an iPhone now. I mean, I've got a whole section that's just different apps, Bigfoot mapping project, scanning, stuff to link with the thermals, all this other kind of stuff that you can use with your phone, which is great.
Awesome. So what's your take on the Port Chatham Sasquatch?
Good question. Port Chatham. It's obviously an infamous location. It's one of these places that there's been some very dubious stuff out of there previously. Certain shows, we'll say.
The show is certainly dubious.
Yes. The story is interesting, and certainly somebody like Larry Beans Baxter, I would defer to him for his kind of research on it. And I know you guys have had him on before, but he's just become a good friend. And I mean, I spent almost a month with him up there last year, so we didn't get to go to Port Chatham, but we went to Homer, which is the closest area to going to there. What my take on the Port Chatham thing is, I think it's an area where, I mean, I don't see why there wouldn't be any Sasquatch, right? The rest of the Kenai Peninsula, where Area A is, I mean, it's not close to there, but it's the same type of environment where Les Stroud had his weird encounter. I did a video on that too a few months ago. It's the same kind of habitat. Like, there are stories. I met people at the Boreal Bigfoot Expo up there last year, told me I grew up on the Kenai Peninsula, and the old timers used to tell us about the hairy man. Like, the stories are there. I don't see why they wouldn't be in Port Chatham, but I think that story got overblown into a massacre. And it seems like the truth is a little less fanciful than the extreme version, which is Bigfoot was killing people, and that's why the town abandoned. If you look at why the town was abandoned, there was a lot more economic reasons.
Yeah, the economy dried up for that type of business.
Yeah, it was a fishing and a logging community. The fish cannery basically burned down, and that was a huge economic incentive. And that at the time, the 50s and the 60s, when the abandonment kind of happened, I think it was in the 40s and 50s, that's when the oil boom was kind of starting in Alaska. People were starting to get jobs there, a lot more lucrative. Move your family to Anchorage, work for Shell or Exxon, instead of in this remote community that's so hard to get to, and the chance of death is extremely high, getting crushed by logging equipment. There's so many factors that led to the abandonment. There used to be even a little community where Area A is. There used to be a town about 100 years ago. And you'll run into remnants of human civilization all along that coast, even stuff going back to when it was part of Russia. I mean, the Russians really use it to extract resources, primarily fishing, logging. And then when the U.S. took it over, it was the same thing, mostly on the coast. And a lot of these communities and places they're destitute now. Port Chatham was abandoned. Yeah.
And
so
for those who don't know, that was the Seward purchase.
Yes, Seward's Folly, as they call it, right? Which is considered to be a big mistake. And hey, I think a lot of people, it's not a mistake now, but yeah. So when I did my video on the Kenai Peninsula, which came out like 5 or 6 months ago at this point, February. And I had interviewed Les Stroud about his encounter that happened out there. I wasn't interested in his show or any of the characters he was involved in afterwards. I mean, I'm a little disappointed with his show, as I'm sure a lot of us are. But I remember distinctly when he talked about his encounter that happened on the Kenai Peninsula many years ago when he was filming Survivor Man. And it was an interesting connection with Area A, actually, because the property owner, he had contacted he had a boat captain, a guy who was bringing lumber out for him and materials for the cabin, had a bigger boat. And so initially when they started having stuff happen to Area A, the property owner had contacted this guy with the boat and said, I'm having this weird stuff happen. And the guy's like, yeah, it's Sasquatch. And he's like, man, come on. Why are you pulling my leg? This is silly. He's like, no, really. I mean, I'm not joking. You know who Les Stroud is? Sure, I know who Les Stroud is. Well, I was contracted by his production company to take him out onto the Kenai Peninsula and film him. This was like 2006 or 2007. And when we picked him up, he looked like crap. And he was saying something about, what is the chance Sasquatch exists? And then I heard that story from the property owner, and I go back and I rewatched the Alaska episode of Survivor Man when he's out there, and they happen to show one shot of the boat, and I see the name of it. I don't recall the name, and it lined up perfectly to pictures I received from the property owner when he was having stuff brought out for the building material.
Hopefully, the boat wasn't named the SS Minnow.
No, but it was the same boat. So I thought, okay, that's a cool kind of connection. So yeah, again, Port Chatham story, just to kind of circle back to that. I think it just blown out of proportion, has turned into a bit of a Bigfoot circus now, as a lot of things do, unfortunately. The show obviously made that into something that it's definitely not. And if you read
every time there was Bigfoot activity, they'd run away.
It was like a demonologist, and they had all kinds of weird stuff going on.
And then it was kind of funny. I tell the story, and I probably said it here on the show before a few times, but that the last episode of that show, I remember being frustrated watching show after show. Like every time they see something, they run away.
Yeah.
And then the final show, I'm like, it's like the last 5 minutes. I'm like grab my wife's arm and go, watch what happens. And of course, as they're going away in the last episode, oh, the cabin's burning down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. And it's funny because they weren't even
got to have the hook for the next season.
Well, they didn't even go. They were not the first people there. Like Beans was on 2 expeditions that went out there with Stephen Major and some of those guys that went to Port Chatham and did kind of more of what we do, like an investigation, instead of going there and just dramatizing it.
Right.
And yeah, so again, I think the story is there probably could have been people that had sightings in that community. I don't see why not. I mean, they probably saw all kinds of other animals while out there, and somehow maybe people died in the ways that you die, a brutal existence out there in the wilderness, and that gets rolled into Bigfoot. And I've heard other people say, oh, it was all just made up, but I've heard enough.
And then there's a possibility of there being a serial killer in Port
Who
Chatham
knows?
at the time too.
I mean, throws a body in the water, like why not, right?
Right.
So, but the core of the story is that the town was abandoned because Bigfoot was killing people, which is demonstrably false and has basically been proven false. It was a gradual abandonment of the town, and Larry Beans Baxter has a whole book on it, and it's definitely a better resource. And he did the research, and his wife works for the Kenai Bureau out there, and like he was able to really dig into some of that stuff.
Yeah, the amazing thing is that all the players involved in that program are not actually into Bigfoot research.
Right.
And that spells the big issue of
entertainment purposes only.
Entertainment purposes. It starts off on a lie, a premise that's a lie, that it was abandoned because of a Bigfoot.
Right. It's a sexy idea. Like that's an idea that they want to sell and market, and that's what they did. But you actually peel it back. in my opinion, the truth is way more in the middle. You know, that there probably could have been some sightings, but the accidents and the deaths were more than likely attributed to the majority of the reasons why people die in those kinds of areas, which is just normal stuff.
Yeah, folly of human beings.
Missing people, same thing. I mean, most people die or disappear because of stupidity.
When Les Stroud did his Alaska episode, he filmed a reaction to him hearing that sound from the bush. And I don't know if it appeared on the original episode or not, but I have seen that, I think, somewhere on YouTube.
Yeah, it wasn't on the original episode because he said at the time he wasn't doing anything Bigfoot. He wasn't focused on that.
Right.
But he did say afterwards that it was weird. I remember he gave an interview in the Opie and Anthony show, and this was in like 2008, 2009, somewhere around then. And he talked about this encounter, and that has stuck in me ever since. So when I got to interview him last year, I asked him about just this encounter, because this is obviously way after he's done his Bigfoot show.
Right.
I had no interest in the show. We all know the people he went out with that show, you know, unfortunately. So
he had other encounters. Him and his wife at one point in time were living in the woods.
I think,
but the one for Alaska though was very. He actually caught his.
And it was weird.
Camera.
And what happened was, I guess that at the time too, they technically were filming in the Kenai Fjords National Park, which they weren't supposed to be. So they actually got into some trouble because of that. Because the boundaries up there, I mean, you're just in the middle of nowhere. One second you're in national forest, the next second you're in national park. You don't know, there's no boundary. I mean, there's nobody goes out there. So I do think that I remember he told me they got in trouble about filming out there because somebody had asked him, would you go back to that same location? He's like, well, I mean, it's difficult to film in a national park no matter what. So yeah, it's an interesting story because I think at the time, and I'm somebody that grew up on Survivor Man. So again, way before he did his Bigfoot stuff, I was very interested in
Me too.
that story. Yeah, you know, it was like, whoa, this guy, he goes out there. I mean, what did he have happen?
So, Chris, I know there's a ton of questions out there.
Oh, yeah. I've been starring questions for the whole show.
Let's get to them.
Sure.
Let's see. Tate Hieronymus asks, question, Aleks, does Alaska have culvers? Probably not, Lane.
Yeah. No, they do not, unfortunately. Culver's is like a Midwestern fast food joint. Tate got me hooked on it, and then I took Mike Ann there in Florida, and he really likes it too. So they don't have it, unfortunately, but I did try Raising Cane's for the first time in Alaska.
Raising Cane's.
Which is pretty good. Chicken, yeah. It was really, really expensive, but as everything is in Alaska. But yeah.
And Amy says, Aleks, thanks a lot, because Land of the Missing has me having pre-jitters about my upcoming Alaska trip.
Yeah, you want to just be careful. Land of the Missing, for folks who don't know, is a film we did about exactly what it sounds like, Land of the Missing. There's just a lot of missing people cases in Alaska, and like a vast, vast majority of them are just people going missing for mundane reasons, other animals, but there's a few really weird ones up in Alaska. And I'm not into like the Dave Paulides stuff or anything.
Right.
You know, we all know there's some kind of funky stuff with that, but there was a few cases that we thought were interesting. We did a film about it, but yeah, people go missing in Alaska all the time. I mean, we did when we were up there last year. Norm, my buddy, former park ranger in Denali, talked about a lady who had probably just gone crazy and she went missing and they never found a trace of her. And she didn't even go missing in that remote of an area, but it just goes to show that place you get lost out there and you're just done, man. There's no recourse.
Somewhere back in there in all the cobwebs, I think there was a U.S. senator that went missing somewhere in Alaska at one point.
That was a plane crash.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Plane
sure.
crash. They never found it. Still to this
crazy,
day.
Right? Isn't that insane? They can't find a stationary object, but
here's the interesting thing about that, Chris. He was on the church committee. And the church committee was the committee that reinvestigated the Kennedy assassination.
Oh, that one.
Yes. And that was before, the House Select Committee on Assassinations. So
I thought you meant he was up there on like a church thing, like a missionary thing. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on here. David Parker says, were you in the triangle?
I guess. I mean, there's this Alaska Triangle thing up there. I don't know if it's legit or not, but it's like that whole area, Kenai Peninsula up there. And I think people just like the triangles now after the Bridgewater Triangle and the Bermuda Triangle. Yeah, it's a fun idea, right? I mean, yeah, I guess we were technically.
And
there's actually one in Vermont too, I believe.
The Bennington Triangle,
Yeah,
there's the Ossipee Triangle in New Hampshire. Yeah, they're all over the place now.
Wow, there's a triangle in Vermont.
Yeah, check it out, Bennington Triangle. It's a pretty cool one.
Okay, I'm gonna have to write
Buddy
this
Mike
down.
Lucci was doing some research on that.
Learn something new every day. Chris learned something. All right. Oh, Batmom says is all now these some of these questions are from early in the show.
Yeah.
Is all of Alaska expensive or just certain areas?
Pretty much all of Alaska, like even in Anchorage and Fairbanks, which are probably the two most accessible areas.
Yeah.
Because you can drive or fly there. They're going to be more expensive than your average place in the lower 48. But then you've got places like Nome, other places that you cannot physically get to, drive to, you can only fly to, that I've heard a gallon of milk is like $10. I mean, just crazy, crazy prices, because the further you get out, the supply chain gets just further out as well. So the prices just go up. And yeah, everything in Alaska, like I remember I paid for like a sandwich and an orange juice one time. It was almost $20-something. I mean, it was like a small egg sandwich for breakfast that, even, in a place like New York City, that's kind of expensive. So yeah, that's just very average.
My buddy working on the pipeline, he was talking about, what they did after they got off work today. After they got off work during the day, everybody would, of course, drink beer at night. And I remember him complaining about the price of beer. It's like extremely expensive.
Everything is, yeah.
But, okay, Bad Mom. I think this is when we were talking about
the checks.
I would have several extra kids.
It certainly incentivizes stuff like that, right?
Steve, you want to knock out a few of these?
Yeah. Snapples up there are more expensive too. Bring your own.
Oh, Boris.
All righty.
I
think
there's a bunch I've got started there.
Bigfooter, we answered her question.
Yep.
And we got a whole shout out from Stephen Barcelo.
Steve.
Hey, I met Steve a few years ago at Crypticon.
We gotta get him on the show too.
Yes, this is one I had too.
Yeah.
Hey, Alex, did you do any fishing? Was there, and did you look into the local fish as a food source?
Yeah, technically, I did do some fishing. I was with people fishing, so we went out last year. We went out. There's a lot of salmon, like king salmon, silver salmon, and I was just helping the guys. There's quite a bit of a swell on the bay there, so I was feeling a little queasy. But we did do some fishing in the year prior as well. The cabin owner, he had caught some rockfish, and we gutted them and made some fried fish out of that. And yeah, so there's just so much food sources from the ocean there. But yeah, it was cool actually. My buddy Damon, what he did, there's a really big, just what is the fish I'm blanking? Not the salmon, not flounder, halibut. Yes, halibut's huge up there. So
halibut.
Yeah, halibut. I mean, Homer's a halibut capital. But my buddy Damon, who came out with us last year, he got I think it's a 3-day license you can get in Alaska as a visitor. And then he was able to catch a big halibut. And we actually took it home with him, and he shipped it out back home to Washington. Where does he live in Idaho? So he probably has halibut steaks frozen for like the whole year. I mean, the size of the fish, right? Just really cool. So yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of people go to Alaska for the fishing, of course, world class. I mean, just so much fish and seafood out there, resources. Again, I mean, this stuff is all the bears and the carnivores are eating this. So I imagine Sasquatch would probably, if they had the chance, scavenge some of that sort of stuff. Or
you're kind of living near Gloucester, same thing.
Yeah. He just got a lot of that, a lot of the good seafood, I guess. Yeah.
I love to go fishing.
I went on a couple of deep seas out of Gloucester and came back with pounds of cod, which would froze it immediately as soon as it got home, and it would last a year.
Perfect. Best way to eat it. I mean, I tried. Yeah, we had salmon out there. We had all kinds of the fish, delicious fresh stuff. I mean, it's really just ocean to table. And there's no other hands that touch that. So it's just so great. It's just fresh food. And we had a lot of wild game out there as well. We had a lot of the moose and the the caribou and stuff that they had. The guys out there, a lot of people hunt, so a lot of people feed themselves in Alaska based off the critters out there.
I don't think I would want to eat fish every day. I love catching them. I could catch.
Oh
fish
yeah, not every day, but when you got the option to do moose steaks or halibut or this or that, I mean, you just like, yeah, sure, I'll eat whatever. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex, did you ever see a Sasquatch?
No, I have not seen one, and I didn't see one up in Alaska either. But yeah, so sorry to disappoint.
What was your most? We've already discussed that a little bit. I think about
Area A stuff. Yeah,
there was some cool stuff. Yeah, with the handprint thing. That's interesting.
So Steve wanted to know how many Bigfoot sightings are there in Alaska?
I mean, there's a good amount. There's not that many on the BFRO or some of the databases, but just anecdotally from what we were able to hear, there was quite a few. Rob Roy Menzies, friend of mine up there, he owns the Bigfoot Art Gallery, like I mentioned earlier. So it's like he does art and framing work, but then he kind of turned half his shop into like a Bigfoot museum. So he naturally gets a lot of people that will just come to him to tell them their stories, like Cliff does in Oregon or any of the other Bigfoot museums in the US. People will gravitate towards you and tell their stories. And he says about like 30-40% of the time, maybe he gets reports where people will come in and say, I had this encounter, and he's actually surprised at how many he still gets from all across Alaska, from natives, from visitors, other people as well. So it seems like there's a good amount. I mean, I wouldn't say that there's more than other places. When you have an area as large as Alaska with 700,000 people, statistically, that's probably going to be on the lower side. But you also have more people on average that are probably spending time in really wild areas that are more conducive to Sasquatch than other areas. So that could be a factor too. I don't know.
3 more questions, and then we can get out of here. OPR 357. Thank you for being a member, OPR.
Appreciate you.
The way the sheet metal is bent, it looks like someone climbed up on the water tank and fell, causing the metal to bend. What say you?
I think that was related to the siding on the case.
Yeah, maybe the handprint. Well, the metal wasn't bent. I don't know. It would just look like there was just a handprint. There wasn't like any damage or anything to the side of that. But it could be possible that somebody did climb on this water tank and accidentally press their hand. Nobody recalls doing that, but it's obviously, like I said earlier, it's not out of the realm of possibility. But it was just an awkward, kind of weird angle. And that's, again, why we just decided to go through and document it just in case. Because we obviously would have beat up ourselves if we just let it go by.
Exactly.
And, yes. Dang it, why didn't we follow up? Worst thing that can happen is you just get somebody tells you it's nothing. So at least you know.
Thank you, Brian and Chewy Go Hiking, for your support. And I'm glad to hear Chewy is doing okay again.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully his tests will come back okay.
Fingers crossed for the Chooster, man.
Yeah.
One of the coolest dogs I've ever had the chance to go out with. He's always just such a nice guy. I love Brian too. He's my bro.
Hopefully we can get Brian to come up to Whitehall this year.
Oh yeah, definitely. That would be awesome.
Which is the next question. Are you coming to Whitehall this year?
I definitely am. It's one of my favorite events, man. Like I wouldn't miss it. I got my table in, my submission to Barb there. So yeah, I'm good to go.
And of course, remember the infamous hang on, the night mission we went on afterwards.
Fun. It was definitely an interesting night. I mean, every time I've gone to Whitehall, it's been a fun event. But that's obviously a nice way to cap the event for sure.
Yeah, that was like a very unexpected. And the final question we have tonight is from Mike. What program was that for the scan?
That was Scaniverse. So I've got it here. Scaniverse. Oh, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, there we go, right there.
We'll write that down.
Scaniverse, and I also have Polycam, but I don't use that one as much. They give you like 5 free scans, and then you have to buy it. Where Scaniverse, as far as I can tell, is free. So definitely a good resource. If you have an iPhone that has this capability, it's a no-brainer to get this kind of stuff. It just enhances it out in the woods. It's easier.
Are those in the App Store?
Yeah, exactly. You go to the App Store and download it right away.
I'm checking real quick if there's a Droid, because I have a Droid.
Yeah, I know there's different stuff for the non-iPhones, but with all this technology now, it's like they're starting to catch up, and other apps and other programs are filling that void.
Oh, Sandwich
Yeah.
Sabat said, Alex, what kind of shotgun do you carry? I know it's a 12 gauge.
So what I had with me the first year was a Keltec KSG 12. That was actually, I was borrowing it from the cabin owner. But I have used those before and they're cool. The one I had last year was just a basic Maverick 88 5+1 pump. That's the only thing you can legally really carry through Canada. So I was dealing with the Canadian restrictions on my drive. So you can't really take anything with a higher capacity or semi-auto or anything like that. So, but Maverick 88, a basic pump is I mean, it's all you really need up there.
Canada does really like for you to carry the heavy artillery through their country.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole different process, but it was actually surprisingly how easy it was to get the license and everything. And I carry the Bear Brennecke Black Magic Magnum Bear loads, 12 gauge. And that's just, I live in bear country. I prefer to have to like spray them with bear spray instead of having to shoot a bear. But if it's you versus the bear, you don't want to mess around, obviously.
Yep. Well, Alex, I want to thank you for coming on tonight, man. It's been a great, informative, educational program.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. I mean, it's
always
like I said, it's some of my favorite adventures I've had the chance to go on. Alaska's amazing. I'm doing this Alaska Bigfoot cruise actually in September, which is a lot more touristy than anything I really do. So that's going to be interesting to see how that goes. It's got Jeff Meldrum and some other folks as well. So that'll be cool. But yeah, if you guys ever get the chance to go to Alaska, absolutely well worth it. It's not a place you'll forget quickly. And yeah, it really is like, it's just in a class of its own.
And again, folks, if you haven't seen it, Alex, where can we find your stuff?
So you can go to my website, Petakov Media, Petakov media.com. That's got links to all my stuff. I mean, you can go check on the Small Town Monsters website or YouTube channel as well. You'll find it there. But if you go to my website, it has the playlist with like the Alaska stuff and all that kind of stuff. So it's just maybe a little easier to find it that way, but it'll link you to the same place eventually. So that's where to check it out. I did an Alaska Highway video and the drive up, Alaskan Interior Tales. We've got a bunch of Alaska stuff. It's just, again, it's such a cool place that there's just so many great stories, and it was so easy to do multiple videos on it and film. So yeah.
And of course, congratulations on your new series as well. You got going the.
Thank you. Strange Places. Yeah, it's definitely, it's not really Bigfoot related. It's more other weird phenomena, other just weird places. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming up with that series.
Mystery.
Abandoned coal mines, really weird abandoned military bases, other stuff. So it's pretty cool. So yeah, that's something I'm working on quite a bit as well.
Very
anything
cool.
to do with mystery, man. You got me. I'm watching.
I appreciate that.
All right, folks. Chris, do your thing. We're gonna get out of here.
Oh, okay. Well, again, thanks, Alex, for being on with us tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for the show and tell. I love those photos of Alaska, man. It's my dream to do that. I want to go up there and camp out in a tent and stay up all night drinking coffee because of bears. But everybody over in the chat, I appreciate you guys being here. We thank you so much. All our members, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. Glad to have you. You're the world's greatest Bigfoot audience. We appreciate you having you, and we're honored and thrilled that you would spend your Sunday evenings with us. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, hit the thumbs up on the way out. If it's your first time watching, you're not a member or not a subscriber, subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. But we again, thank you guys so much. And back to you, Steve.
Righty. And of course, in case you haven't gotten it yet, The Psychology of Bigfoot is now available on Amazon. So I'll do the shameless plug. Sales are going very well. It's being very well received from what I'm hearing. There's Chris with the book. I got Chris. Hold that right up there. There you go.
Uh-oh.
So that is now available on Amazon.
Love the photo. It's great. The picture. It's great.
So check it out. And of course, we'll be back Friday night with a new episode of Squatch-D TV on Friday. And if people notice that I've been putting up the schedule and the rotating shows and the neat little new graphics we have for the shows, they're all up there. And of course, everybody have a safe and great week. I know tomorrow's Monday, which most people are like, but is what it is. And everybody have a great week. God bless. Stay safe. Most of all, keep on Squatch. We'll catch you all here Friday night, 9 p.m. for our next edition of Squatch-D TV Live. We'll catch you all a little bit.
Night, everybody.
We thank you for being here with us on Squatch-D TV. If you haven't taken the time yet, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And oh yes, hit that notification bell too. We don't want you to miss anything. If you really like our content, you should consider becoming a member, and it's really inexpensive and a great way to support not only the show, but honest Bigfoot research. Everyone have a great week. Be safe and God bless. We will see you all here next time on Squatch-D TV. Keep on squatching.